December 7th, 1941. The day that stunned a nation. In cities across America, from the boardwalks of Los Angeles, where civilians scanned the empty ocean with binoculars, to the canyons of New York, where newsboys shouted the unthinkable, the news of Pearl Harbor crackled over the radio. It turned a peaceful, ordinary Sunday into a day of profound, collective shock and white-hot anger. America, a nation still weary from a decade of economic depression, was deeply divided. The debate between isolationists and interventionists had split families and friends. But in that moment, with the smoke still rising from Hawaii, those divisions evaporated. The bickering of before vanished, replaced by a powerful, all-consuming wave of patriotism. That fear and uncertainty in the first few days were palpable. In coastal cities, blackout drills began almost immediately. Air raid sirens were tested. There was a genuine, terrifying belief that a Japanese or German bomber fleet could appear at any moment. But this fear did not curdle into panic. Instead, it crystallized into a grim, unified resolve. The government, through the new Office of War Information, or WWII, knew that this unity was a weapon. It was a strategic asset, just as important as steel, rubber, or gunpowder. Morale was not just a feeling, it was a front line. It was a fortress that had to be built, defended, and reinforced every single day for the duration of the war. The American city, with its dense populations, its iconic public spaces, and its media hubs, became the grand stage for this new psychological war. Town squares, city halls, and grand avenues like Fifth Avenue or Hollywood Boulevard were transformed from places of commerce and leisure into theaters of patriotism. The rally, the parade, and the public celebration became the essential tools to forge and maintain a single, unbreakable American spirit. The war was impossibly, astronomically expensive. The nation needed to raise billions of dollars, far more than taxes alone could provide. More importantly, the government needed to do it in a way that involved every single citizen, making them a direct financial stakeholder in the victory. The solution was the war bond drive, a massive ongoing campaign that was part fundraiser, part traveling circus, and all high-pressure patriotic spectacle. These were not quiet, private transactions at a bank. They were colossal public rallies held in the heart of America's cities. A typical bond blitz might shut down Times Square for an entire afternoon. A massive temporary stage would be erected, draped in acres of red, white, and blue bunting. Searchlights, normally reserved for movie premieres, would scan the sky, and military bands would play thunderous marches. These were not quiet, private transactions at a bank. They were colossal public rallies held in the heart of America's cities. A typical bond blitz might shut down Times Square for an entire afternoon. A massive temporary stage would be erected, draped in acres of red, white, and blue bunting. Searchlights, normally reserved for movie premieres, would scan the sky, and military bands would play thunderous marches. These props were a brilliant stroke of propaganda. They allowed citizens to connect their $25 bond purchase directly to the fight. When a person bought a bond, they were told, "You've just bought a bullet for a GI," or "This stamp will buy a gallon of gas for a bomber." The campaigns had stirring, aggressive names: Back the Attack, Smash the Japs, the Victory Loan, or the Third War Loan Drive. Hollywood stars, local politicians, and decorated war heroes would take the stage, delivering passionate, sometimes tearful speeches. Children were enlisted through the Stamp Day program at school, buying 25-cent war stamps to fill their books. When a book was full, it could be traded for an $18.75 bond. These rallies were a form of public commitment, a pledge of allegiance paid in cash. And they worked, raising over $185 billion, a testament to a nation's unified financial might. The US government knew it had a secret weapon in its morale war, one that no other nation could match: Hollywood. The stars, those demigods of the silver screen, were enlisted to become the face, the voice, and the driving force of American patriotism. Their involvement transformed the grueling, repetitive war bond drives from a civic duty into a must-see, star-studded extravaganza. The Hollywood Victory Caravan was a prime example. In 1942, a train loaded with the biggest stars in the world, Bing Crosby, Cary Grant, Claudette Colbert, Groucho Marx, Lucille Ball, Bob Hope, left Hollywood and embarked on a grueling cross-country tour. They stopped in dozens of cities to perform, sell bonds, and simply be seen by the adoring, patriotic public. When these stars arrived, cities would shut down. It was a wave of patriotic hysteria. This was more than just celebrity endorsement. It was a profound act of solidarity. These stars, who seemed to live in a different universe, were giving their time, their fame, and in some cases, their lives. Actress Carole Lombard, one of the nation's most beloved stars, became a tragic, sainted hero when she died in a plane crash returning from a massively successful war bond tour. In Los Angeles, the stars created a physical home for morale, the Hollywood Canteen. Founded by Bette Davis and John Garfield, it was a club on Sunset Boulevard where any serviceman or woman in uniform could get free food, coffee, entertainment, and a dance. The magical, unbelievable part? The stars themselves were the volunteers. A young private from Ohio, lonely and scared, might have his coffee poured by Rita Hayworth, get a sandwich from Humphrey Bogart, or be convinced to dance by Marlene Dietrich. This act of service, of the world's biggest stars waiting on the lowest-ranking soldiers, was a powerful democratic symbol. It erased, for one night, the line between the famous and the unknown, uniting them all in a common, patriotic cause. The parade was the most visible, mobile, and democratic form of public celebration. It was a way for a city to literally put its patriotism on display, to show its strength, its resources, and its total unity in motion. These were not rare. Cities held massive parades for Army Day, Navy Day, I Am an American Day, and for the kickoff of every new war bond drive. What made these wartime parades unique was who was marching. They were a perfect living cross-section of the total war effort, a visual representation of the entire community mobilized. Of course, there were the soldiers, sailors, and Marines, their sharp uniforms and precise, thundering marching drawing waves of thunderous applause. But marching right behind them, in their own new uniforms, were the heroes of the home front. The local Civilian Defense Corps marched, their air raid warden helmets and armbands a proud symbol of the city's preparedness. Red Cross nurses, a sea of blue and white, marched in disciplined ranks, earning cheers almost as loud as those for the soldiers. Local factory workers, often women fresh from their shifts, would march under a banner proclaiming the name of their plant, Consolidated Aircraft or Brooklyn Navy Yard, and the tanks, planes, or ships they built. They were treated as heroes, right alongside the soldiers, and they marched with a visible, tired pride. And then there was the youth, the future of the fight. High school marching bands provided the constant stirring soundtrack of patriotism. Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts marched, often pulling wagons piled high with the scrap metal, newspapers, or rubber they had collected for the war effort. These parades were a living, breathing display of a city's total mobilization, a powerful, rhythmic reminder that every single citizen had a role to play. Patriotism was not always loud. It was not always cheering crowds, brass bands, and ticker tape. In every city, on every block, a quieter, more profound, and more constant patriotism was on display. This was the patriotism of shared sacrifice, embodied by the simple, ubiquitous service flag. These small, rectangular banners, hung reverently in the front windows of homes, were a national institution. The flag featured a red border, a white field, and a blue star for each family member serving in the armed forces. A walk down any city street, from a working-class borough in Brooklyn to a wealthy street in San Francisco, became a visual census of that neighborhood's contribution. 1 star, 2 stars, sometimes agonizingly 3 or 4 from a single family. These banners were a source of immense pride, but they were also a constant low-level thrum of anxiety. They were a public marker of a family's personal, terrifying stake in the war. They were a daily reminder of the human cost. They connected the quiet homes of New York or Chicago directly to the mud of Anzio, the beaches of Guadalcanal, or the skies over Germany. And then there was the gold star. When a serviceman or woman was killed in action, the blue star on the banner was replaced with a gold one. This small, heartbreaking change transformed the flag from a symbol of pride to a symbol of ultimate, unimaginable sacrifice. A gold star in a window would bring a hush to the street. Neighbors would share the news in whispers, offering quiet support. Cities formalized this honor. In town squares and public parks, they erected large, floodlit honor rolls. These were massive wooden plaques, painted white, meticulously listing the name of every single man and woman from that town who was serving. This public display turned private anxiety and individual grief into a shared communal burden, reinforcing the sober purpose behind all the noise and celebration. Amidst the grand parades and the high-pressure rallies, a simpler, quieter, and more persistent form of public patriotism emerged. It was the V for Victory campaign. Popularized by Winston Churchill and broadcast into occupied Europe by the BBC, the V became the universal symbol of Allied defiance and inevitable triumph. This symbol was absolutely everywhere, a brilliant piece of simple, effective propaganda. It was a way for citizens to participate in a silent, constant, national rally, a non-stop gesture of solidarity. Women wore V-shaped jewelry, pins, necklaces, and brooches. The V was integrated into advertising for everything from fountain pens to cigarettes. Newspapers printed it. Factories painted it on their walls. Women in magazines were photographed holding their fingers in a V sign. It was a constant, visual reminder of the shared goal. The campaign even had an audio component, one that was both clever and haunting. The first 4 notes of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, ... matched the Morse code for the letter V. This simple, ominous, and powerful refrain was used by the WWII and radio networks as an audio signature. It was played as a station identifier at the start of news broadcasts, a soundtrack to victory that burrowed itself into the national consciousness. This V was more than just a logo. It was a way for an American citizen walking down the street to feel connected to a British pilot in the skies over Germany or a French resistance fighter in a Parisian cafe. It was a simple public gesture that bound the entire free world together in a shared, indomitable, and absolutely certain purpose. The rallies and celebrations were not just for the soldiers at the front. The government, with brilliant foresight, understood that the morale of the workers, the soldiers of production, was just as critical. The arsenal of democracy needed its own heroes, and these heroes needed to be celebrated publicly and tangibly. The most coveted award of the home front was the Army-Navy E for Excellence. This was a program where the military would honor a factory that had achieved outstanding, above and beyond results in war production. It recognized plants that met or exceeded their quotas, maintained quality, and conserved materials. Winning the E was not a quiet affair. It was a massive, public celebration. The the factory would hold a huge ceremony, often stopping production for an hour. High-ranking military officials, generals and admirals, would arrive to present the factory with a special E-flag, which would then be flown proudly from the factory's main flagpole, often right below the American flag. This was a profoundly powerful motivator. It was a way of telling the welders, the riveters, and the assembly line workers that their labor was the direct equivalent of combat. They weren't just punching a clock, they were fighting the war, and they were winning. It fostered intense pride and competition between factories, as each vied for the prestigious award. Every single worker at the factory was also given a personal E-pin to wear on their overalls or jacket. This pin became a coveted badge of honor, a public sign that its wearer was a soldier of production. These rallies, held right on the factory floor, turned grueling industrial work from a job into a high-stakes, patriotic mission, vital for keeping the assembly lines running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. For nearly 4 long, exhausting years, the rallies, the bond drives, the parades, and the awards had all served a purpose. They were a form of organized, controlled, and sustained patriotism, designed to channel the nation's energy, manage its grief, and focus its will to win. But in 1945, that control finally gave way to a spontaneous, explosive, and cathartic release. The first wave came in May, with VE Day, Victory in Europe. When the news of Germany's surrender came, cities erupted in celebration, church bells rang, and people poured into the streets, hugging, cheering, and weeping. But this celebration was tempered. It was joyous, but it was incomplete. The war in the Pacific still raged, and millions of men were still in harm's way. Then, 3 months later, in August 1945, came the news. Japan had surrendered. This was it. The war, the entire global 6-year nightmare, was over. The celebration that followed was like nothing America had ever seen, before or since. It was not a planned rally. It was not a government-sponsored parade. It was a singular, spontaneous, psychic explosion of joy, relief, and pent-up grief. In Times Square, the most iconic celebration of all unfolded. Over 2 million people crammed into the square, a sea of humanity. Strangers kissed strangers. Sailors, soldiers, and civilians danced, wept, and screamed. Ticker tape, torn paper, and confetti rained down from every open window, a snowstorm of pure joy that buried the streets. This was not a celebration for morale. This was the result of it. It was the moment when all the sacrifice, the bond drives, the rationing, the endless factory shifts, the make do and mend, and the gold star banners in the windows, was finally, completely, and triumphantly redeemed. It was the last and greatest public celebration of the war, a punctuation mark on the most unified and patriotic moment in American history.